Aislinn, welcome back to Collection Cutdown. Today's video is on Aeon Flux, starring Charlize Theron. It shouldn't surprise anybody that I love action movies starring women. Badass women doing awesome stunts and firing guns and kicking people in the face. Like, that is so far up my alley, you have no idea. But I remember this film getting very heavily panned on its release, but I remember quite enjoying it, possibly just because I'm very biased towards action movies starring women, like, because there's just so few of them that I get overly excited and immediately love them regardless of quality. I also love sci-fi movies. I love movies about assassins, which I can't explain, but it's one of those things I just really dig. This actually has a lot of the things I like in it. I was pretty much always destined to like it as a teenager, but I'm very curious to see if I'm more critical these days. All I remember about this movie is that it featured a woman kicking butt and that it had a cool twist, or something I thought was cool at the time. Spoilers, something to do with cloning, maybe? I know that it's based on another property. That would explain why it got so much hate, particularly if it was from fans, because anime adaptations in Hollywood are notoriously awful. I quite like the other people listed in the credits here: Martin Sokas, Johnny Lee Miller, Frances McDormand, Sophie Okonedo. Hopefully it's not all bad. What I do remember most about this movie is the scathing reviews. So the fact that I remember enjoying it so much is very curious. I'm a very unsophisticated viewer, so if you give me a cool female character beating people up, I'm probably gonna dig it, but at the same time I think nowadays I am a lot more willing to see flaws in things and analyze them. A lot of female action heroes have this problem that they're highly sexualized, and I suspect that's going to be the case in this movie, and I think that's going to bug me more than it would have when I was a teenager seeing this for the first time. I have never seen whatever this is based on, so I don't really have any opinion about the accuracy of it, or lack thereof, as the case may be. I did notice on the back of the DVD cover in the credits that Gail Ann Hurd is listed as a producer, and she was a producer on the original Terminator movie. Considering that Sarah Connor is like my ultimate female action heroine, total idol, I adore those movies, I am a little bit more excited about seeing this after seeing her name in the credits. But, you know, again, it doesn't really prove anything. I don't know how much power she had. So this could end up being a total disaster. This is another one that's been sitting on my shelf for a long time and that I have actually wanted to rewatch for a long time. And I'm really glad that I'm getting this opportunity to do it. So I'm going to dive right in and see you all on the other side. So the plot of the film is that in a futuristic world, Charlize Theron plays a rebel assassin who is, after the death of her sister, she's tasked with killing the ruler of their community, the last humans alive after a disease or whatever. And then turns out not everything is what she thinks it is, and everything changes and so on. I can certainly see why this failed at the box office. I'm not gonna pretend that this is a great film. Apparently there was some trouble in post-production. The director got fired and her cut of the film was pretty savaged by the studios. Most of the time, yeah, I found it fairly coherent, but apparently according to the reviews, that's like a big thing. People think it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm sure it could have been richer and better had they left those 20 minutes in that got cut out, but yeah, for me, that wasn't really the issue I had with the film. Mostly the problem that I had was that this movie does get praised for its visuals, and I can see why, but I think that a lot of this would have worked better in the anime. Presumably some of those visuals are direct from that, because it does look very much like an anime film. Despite the fact that I'm sure they came from the anime and they looked cool, it was just silly. The amount of flips in this movie that didn't need to be there, was astronomical. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. I mean, flips look cool, but when you have 50,000 of them in a film, at some point you're just like, why is she flipping all the time? No surprise, but the fashion was a little bit silly at times. Speaking of the fashion, one thing that I was concerned about is that Charlize Theron was going to be really overly sexualized, because that's a real problem in female-led action movies. I think it was a little bit of an issue. Like, I wouldn't say that it was perfect in that sense, but it actually wasn't nearly as bad as I expected. And I think that's really just, like, Charlize Theron is a very attractive woman, and you're gonna have to do a lot to downplay that, and I think they really just made no effort to do so. I was mostly fine with how she was dressed. It actually didn't bug me, and I was very grateful for that, because I was really going into it expecting that to be like a huge problem, particularly with the marketing of the film and everything. But yeah, I was okay. I'm going to attribute this to it being directed by a woman, Karen Kusuma. Female directors have a high hit rate for me in not sexualizing their female characters. I think one of the reasons that I enjoyed this film so much as a teenager has to be because of the relationship, the love story between Charlize Theron's character and Martin Sockas's character. I've mentioned before that romances are a big thing for me, and I like them. I like them in any genre of film. This time around, though, I wasn't as convinced by it as I think I must have been back in the day. And this time around, it felt a little bit overplayed in the way they did the chemistry. Like, it wasn't as subtle as I enjoy these days. I know that they had to kind of go full on with it because so much of the plot hinges on them being into each other and remembering their past life together. I wasn't quite convinced that their love was strong enough to overcome her assassin conditioning and the fact that she hated him and everything he stood for. And yeah, she was kind of figuring out that there was more going on, but it really did kind of feel a bit too sudden for me. And that's maybe something that would have worked better maybe in the longer cut of the film or something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just not in the right mood for it today, who knows. But the thing is, I think that now I'm really not so into that trope. So anything that is fated mates or, you know, soulmates or in this case reincarnation of a sorts and sort of, you know, falling in love over multiple lives, it's really not my favorite thing. It feels like a cheat. As a romance consumer, I like to watch people fall in love, and it feels to me like a cheat for them to already be there when they meet. I just don't find it as interesting or as compelling, and I think that was really the problem with this, that, you know, they were trying really hard with the chemistry, and I might have bought it, I think, under different circumstances with a love story that was more my kind of thing. I probably wouldn't have had a problem with it because they did have decent chemistry with each other. But yeah, for me that really just, it didn't work just for me on my level. But, you know, that's a mileage may vary situation. In fact, I found it even a little bit creepy. So the idea is that they were married like 400 years ago, and this is the first time she'd been reincarnated, but he'd been reincarnated multiple times over this 400 years. So they kind of remembered each other, but kind of didn't. But they still sort of loved each other, but they were different people now. At least she was. He had reincarnated himself as himself repeatedly, but she was, you know, Catherine back then and Aeon Flux now. So for me, it kind of felt like he was projecting Catherine onto her because they weren't the same person. And so it really felt more like he was in love with her looks than her personality, particularly because her personality was like assassin trying to kill him. So there wasn't a lot that was convincing for him to fall in love with at that point in the story. So I think, I know I'm overthinking it, but it just didn't quite work for me. Speaking of the love story, Trevor, who is the other half to Charlize Theron, I found him quite inconsistent, and I think that maybe, again, a problem with the edit, but it his character didn't make a lot of sense to me. So the idea is that he had become so wrapped up in his science experiments in trying to cure this thing that's wrong with the people that he didn't notice that his own brother was like staging a coup against him. The thing is that the brother was manipulating the results of the experiment and was like, oh no, it failed, when it didn't. And so Trevor is meant to be so obsessed with his science experiments that he didn't notice anything else going on around him, including his subjects being murdered. And yet he also didn't notice that his brother was ruining his experiments as well. Like, you know, make up your mind. There was also the problem that everywhere around this city where they live, there are posters of his face everywhere. Not really like an egomaniac despot. Why are there posters of his face literally everywhere in this city? It doesn't make any sense. Presumably, somebody else has put those posters up and are using them as like a propaganda tool. Maybe the brother. And for a guy who's trying to hide the fact that he's being cloned repeatedly over 400 years, why would you keep showing your face in posters? And then people would be like, you know, wait a minute, that's the same guy who was here like last generation. Or were those posters meant to be like the original version of him and that's like the savior and it's like having a Jesus poster up on your wall or something? Like, that was never explained to me, and I found that all a little bit weird and silly and inconsistent. I did watch this movie purely because it's a female-led action movie, and in that sense, it kind of delivered. Like, the action was fine. I thought Charlize Theron was convincing as like a assassin. It just wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. So what was the overall verdict? I mean, I went into this really not sure how I was going to react. Like, maybe I would love it or maybe I would be hugely disappointed. And I think I sit somewhere in between the two. Like, it was a good looking film. It had interesting visuals. I thought the world building was interesting, if not entirely coherent all the time. There was enough that I liked about it that I didn't hate watching it. At the same time, I'm kind of leaving the movie feeling a little bit just cold and meh. It wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It wasn't as good as it could have been. I think the things that I really enjoyed about it the first time round, mostly the romance, didn't work for me as well this time, and therefore overall the film didn't work as well for me this time. I wouldn't say don't see it. It's another one of those movies that if you're in the mood for that kind of thing, like there's really not enough female action movies to just dismiss one out of hand, but it's not great. So if you're really in the mood for that and you've seen all the others, this is an okay example, you know? It's not, you know, the worst. But I wouldn't just rave about it and say you must go out and see it, it's totally underrated. You know, all those people who panned it at the box office are wrong, because they're not. So ultimately, I think that means I'm not going to keep this one. I wish I could say differently. I wish I could say I loved it because I really wanted to, but I think it's not happening. Another of those movies that if I see it again, alright, but if I don't, not the end of the world. And really, those are the kinds of movies that I need to just say goodbye to and don't really need them in my collection. Next time, we've got another classic, An Affair to Remember. Be prepared for me to cry a lot. Please consider liking and subscribing. I love hearing from people, so if you want to comment as well, please do. Otherwise, bye for now and happy watching.
Mm-hmm.